Well, I'm wondering, you ever noticed how silence can feel louder than a scream? That's where I want to start. Right in that moment where the room goes still, where someone says nothing and somehow says everything. Machiavelli understood that moment better than anyone. He treated silence like a blade, thin and cold and perfectly balanced. And before you roll your eyes and say, "Oh great, another lecture about old Italian men," relax. This isn't a history class. This is a confrontation. Because you and I both know you've been on the receiving end of someone's silence before, and you didn't even realize you were being played. That's the hook. That's the sting. That's Law 4 warming up in the corner like a boxer taping his wrists. And here's the question that should already be crawling under your skin. Why does saying less make someone more powerful? Why does withholding words make people lean in like they're trying to hear a secret? You think it's because humans are logical? Please. Humans are about as logical as a goat trying to climb a tree because it saw another goat do it once. People don't chase truth. They chase mystery. They chase gaps. They chase whatever they can't fully grasp. And Machiavelli knew that. He knew that the moment you start explaining yourself, you start shrinking. The moment you start justifying, you start bleeding. And the moment you start talking too much, you hand your opponent the map to your weaknesses. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. Let's build the suspense properly, because Machiavelli would have smirked at you rushing to the ending. He'd say, "Slow down. Watch the middle. That's where the trap is." So let me ask you something, and don't pretend you don't know the answer. Have you ever talked yourself into trouble? Have you ever filled the silence because it felt uncomfortable, only to realize later that you gave away more than you meant to? Of course you have. Everyone has. It's human nature. The Japanese have a saying, "The nail that sticks out gets hammered down." Machiavelli would have added, "And the nail that talks too much gets hammered faster." And yet, you think people want your honesty? They want your mystery. They want your restraint. They want the version of you that makes them guess. Because guessing gives them something to obsess over. And obsession is power. That's the anticipation Machiavelli built his entire worldview on. The idea that people fear what they can't predict. And if they can't predict you, they can't control you. But if you talk too much, if you spill every thought like a broken jar, congratulations. You just handed them the instruction manual to your mind. Well. And here's the part you're not going to like. You already know this. You've felt it. You've lived it. You've watched someone say almost nothing and somehow dominate the entire room. You've watched someone shrug or smirk or raise an eyebrow, and suddenly everyone else is scrambling to interpret the gesture like it's ancient scripture. Meanwhile, you're over there explaining yourself like a customer service representative on their last shift. And you wonder why you feel powerless. You wonder why you feel misunderstood. You wonder why people don't take you seriously. It's because you're filling the silence. instead of weaponizing it. Listen, let me give you a metaphor from the Middle East. The camel that shows its teeth invites the stick. Machiavelli would have laughed at that one. Ah, he'd say, exactly. Show less, reveal less. Let them guess whether you bite. And before you say, but I'm just being honest, let me stop you right there. Honesty is great. Honesty is noble. Honesty is also the fastest way to get emotionally mugged by someone who knows how to use your words against you. And don't pretend you haven't seen that happen. Don't pretend you haven't watched someone twist your meaning, your intentions, your vulnerability into something sharp enough to cut you with. And here's the suspense, the tension, the part where you're supposed to lean in. Why does saying less work so well? Why does it unsettle people? Why does it make them project their fears, their fantasies, their insecurities onto you? And why did Machiavelli treat silence like a currency? You want the payoff? Fine. Here it is. Saying less forces people to reveal themselves. They fill the silence with their assumptions. They expose their desires. They confess their fears without realizing they're confessing. And you? You sit there, quiet, watching the truth spill out of them like water from a cracked pot. But don't get it twisted. I'm not telling you to manipulate anyone. I'm telling you to understand the psychology behind the tactic. I'm telling you to recognize when someone is using it on you. Because you've fallen for it before. You've mistaken someone's silence for depth. You've mistaken someone's restraint for wisdom. You've mistaken someone's lack of words for strength. And maybe it was strength. Or maybe it was strategy. Or maybe it was just someone who knew that the less they said, the more you'd imagine. And here's where I soften for a second. Yes, I'm capable of that. Don't look so shocked. I'm telling you this because I actually care about how often you've been blindsided by people who understood these dynamics better than you did. I'm telling you this because you deserve to see the game instead of being played by it. You're not naive. You're not foolish. You're just someone who assumed people communicate with clarity and sincerity. And that's adorable. Truly. But Machiavelli would have patted your head and said, "Wake up." This is just the beginning. This is just law 4 warming up. And trust me, the next laws, the ones about belief, about legacy, about stepping into someone else's shadow, they get even messier, even more human, even more revealing. And yet, the thing Machiavelli understood better than anyone, the thing that still makes people uncomfortable centuries later, is that stepping into someone else's legacy doesn't just burden you with expectations. It traps you inside a narrative you didn't write. You become the sequel nobody asked for, the replacement nobody wanted, the update people resent even if it's objectively better. Humans cling to the original because it gives them the illusion of stability. They treat the first version like a sacred relic, even if it was flawed, even if it was chaotic, even if it was held together with duct tape and charisma. And you, poor you, walk in thinking competence will save you, thinking effort will redeem you, thinking fairness will protect you. It won't. It never has. There's a saying from Argentina: the second mate always sails in the captain's shadow. Machiavelli would have rolled his eyes and said, yes, and the shadow is the real captain. Because that's the truth. The predecessor becomes a myth, and myths are impossible to compete with. You can't outperform nostalgia. You can't outshine a memory. You can't win against a ghost people have polished into perfection. Listen. Here's the part you never admit out loud. You've felt that weight before. You've stepped into roles where people didn't want you. They wanted the person who came before you. They wanted the familiar rhythm, the familiar tone, the familiar flaws. They wanted the comfort of what they already understood. And you, with your new ideas, your new energy, your new perspective, became a disruption, not a successor, a disruption. And humans hate disruptions. They react to them the way a startled horse reacts to a shadow, irrationally, violently, instinctively. They don't evaluate you. They compare you. They don't see your strengths. They see the absence of the old strengths. They don't see your potential. They see the gap between you and the myth they've built in their heads. And you wonder why you felt like you were drowning. You wonder why nothing you did was enough. You wonder why every step felt like walking uphill in sand. It wasn't you. It was the shoes. Shoes that were never meant to fit you. Shoes that were designed for someone else's story. And yet, Machiavelli, in his beautifully cynical way, wasn't telling you to avoid greatness. He was telling you to avoid inheriting greatness. There's a difference. One is earned. One is borrowed. One is built. One is inherited. And inherited power is always fragile, because it depends on the memory of someone else. It depends on the emotional loyalty people still hold toward the predecessor. It depends on nostalgia, and nostalgia is a tyrant. It rewrites history. It exaggerates virtues. It erases flaws. It turns the predecessor into a legend, and legends are impossible to replace. There's a proverb from Kenya: a borrowed cloak never fits. Machiavelli would have smirked and said, and it tears the moment you try to move. Listen, here's where I lean in, because this is the part that matters. The part you need to hear, even if you pretend you don't. You've spent too much of your life stepping into other people's roles, filling gaps, fixing messes, replacing someone who left a vacuum. And every time, you thought the problem was you. You thought you weren't good enough. You thought you weren't impressive enough. You thought you weren't charismatic enough. But the truth is simpler and far more brutal. You were never meant to inherit someone else's story. You were meant to write your own. And every time you tried to continue a narrative that wasn't yours, you were punished for it. Not because you lacked ability, but because humans cling to the familiar like a drowning man clings to driftwood. They don't want the new. They want the old, resurrected. And you can't resurrect someone else's ghost. So, this is where all three laws start weaving together, whether you realize it or not. Saying less than necessary, playing on people's need to believe, avoiding the shadow of a predecessor. They're not separate ideas. They're the same psychological architecture viewed from different angles. They're all about perception. They're all about the stories people tell themselves. They're all about the emotional shortcuts humans use to make sense of the world. Silence creates mystery. Mystery creates belief. Belief creates myth. Myth creates shadows. Shadows create traps. And you, if you're not paying attention, walk straight into those traps thinking you're being noble, or honest, or hard-working, or loyal. Meanwhile, Machiavelli is in the corner sipping wine, muttering, "You sweet summer child." Because here's the truth, and I know you're ready for it because you wouldn't be here if you weren't. Humans don't respond to logic. They respond to narrative. They respond to emotion. They respond to the illusion of certainty. They respond to the familiar. They respond to the mysterious. They respond to whatever fills the gaps in their understanding with the least amount of cognitive effort. And Machiavelli wasn't judging them for it. He was describing them. He was holding up a mirror to human nature and saying, "This is what you're dealing with. Stop pretending otherwise." And you, with your tendency to assume people think as deeply as you do, feel as sharply as you do, analyze as ruthlessly as you do, you've been blindsided by this more times than you want to admit. You've expected clarity from people who thrive on ambiguity. You've expected fairness from people who worship nostalgia. You've expected honesty from people who fear silence. You've expected logic from people who follow belief like it's oxygen. And I'm telling you this not to make you cynical, but to make you aware. Because awareness is the antidote to confusion. Awareness is the shield against disappointment. Awareness is the difference between being played by the game and finally seeing the board. There's a saying from Mongolia: the one who sees the wind before it blows is never surprised by the storm. Machiavelli would have nodded and said, "Exactly. Stop being surprised." And I'm telling you this because I actually care about how often you've been blindsided by people who understood these dynamics instinctively while you were still trying to play fair. You're not naive. You're not foolish. You're not weak. You're just someone who assumed the world operated on the same principles you do. And it doesn't. It never has. And once you finally see all of this, the silence, the belief, the shadow, you start realizing how much of your life has been shaped not by what people said, but by what they needed to believe about you. That's the part nobody warns you about. People don't see you as you are. They see you as a character in their internal mythology. They assign you roles based on their insecurities, their nostalgia, their fears, their fantasies, and then they punish you for not fitting the script they wrote in their heads. Machiavelli wasn't being dramatic when he said human nature is predictable. He was being merciful. He was giving you the cheat codes. Because once you understand that people project more than they perceive, you stop taking their reactions personally. You stop thinking every criticism is about your flaws. You stop thinking every comparison is about your worth. You stop thinking every silence is about your failure. Most of the time, it's not about you at all. It's about the story they're trying to preserve. And that's the part that stings the most, isn't it? The realization that half the battles you fought weren't even yours. You were fighting ghosts, fighting expectations, fighting the emotional debris left behind by someone else's legacy. You were trying to prove yourself in arenas where the judges weren't evaluating you. They were mourning the predecessor. You were trying to earn respect from people who weren't ready to let go of the past. And you blamed yourself for their grief. You blamed yourself for their nostalgia. You blamed yourself for their inability to adapt. It's like that old Persian metaphor. A man chasing his shadow will never catch it and will exhaust himself trying. Machiavelli would have shrugged and said, exactly, stop chasing shadows. But here's the twist, and you knew it was coming. The moment you stop chasing, the moment you stop explaining, the moment you stop trying to fill someone else's shoes, everything shifts. People start seeing you differently. Not because they suddenly become enlightened, but because you stop feeding the narrative they built around you. You stop giving them the version of you that fits their expectations. You stop performing the role they assigned you. And that's when they finally have to confront the truth. You were never meant to be a replacement. You were never meant to be a sequel. You were never meant to be a continuation of someone else's story. You were meant to be the disruption, the deviation, the new chapter. And yes, that scares people. Humans fear the unfamiliar the way sailors fear uncharted waters. But uncharted waters are where new maps are drawn. And this is where Machiavelli's brilliance becomes almost uncomfortable. Because he wasn't just analyzing tactics, he was analyzing identity. He was analyzing the way people cling to illusions because reality is too heavy. He was analyzing the way people worship certainty because uncertainty feels like drowning. He was analyzing the way people elevate the past because the present feels unstable. And you, with your tendency to walk into rooms assuming people want truth, you've been blindsided by this again and again. You've offered clarity to people who wanted mystery. You've offered honesty to people who wanted comfort. You've offered competence to people who wanted nostalgia. And every time, you walked away wondering what you did wrong. But here's the truth you've been circling without naming. You didn't do anything wrong. You were simply operating on a different wavelength. You were speaking in logic while they were listening in emotion. You were offering substance while they were craving belief. You were stepping forward while they were clinging backward. It's like that proverb from Ghana. The one who climbs the tree first gets the best view, but the ones on the ground complain about the branches. Machiavelli would have smirked and said, "Exactly. People resent what they can't follow." And this is why these laws, these three in particular, form a kind of psychological triangle. Silence creates ambiguity. Ambiguity creates belief. Belief creates myth. Myth creates shadows. Shadows create traps. And if you don't understand the chain, you get caught in it. You get pulled into roles you didn't choose. You get judged by standards you didn't set. You get compared to people you never met. You get punished for expectations you never agreed to. And the worst part? You internalize it. You start thinking you're the problem. You start thinking you're inadequate. You start thinking you're failing. When really, you're just standing in the wrong narrative. And I'm telling you this, yes, with all the sarcasm and tough love you can handle, because I actually want you to stop carrying the weight of other people's projections. I want you to stop mistaking their nostalgia for your inadequacy. I want you to stop confusing their discomfort with your identity. You're not the understudy. You're not the replacement. You're not the sequel. You're the rewrite. And rewrites always make people uncomfortable at first. They challenge the myth. They disrupt the belief. They break the silence. They force people to confront the fact that the world is changing whether they like it or not. And Machiavelli, in his beautifully ruthless way, would have told you the same thing. Stop trying to fit into stories that weren't written for you. Stop trying to fill shoes that were never your size. Stop trying to win battles that were lost before you even arrived. Human nature is predictable, yes, but that doesn't mean you have to be predictable within it. You can understand the game without becoming the game. You can see the patterns without being trapped by them. You can recognize the shadows without stepping into them. And once you finally see all of this, the silence, the belief, the shadows, the myths, you stop blaming yourself for battles that were never yours. You stop trying to fill roles you never chose. You stop shrinking to fit expectations built from nostalgia and projection. You finally understand that most of the reactions you faced weren't about your worth, but about the stories people were trying to protect. And that's the shift Machiavelli wanted you to reach. The moment you stop taking human nature personally and start seeing it clearly. Because clarity is the real power, not manipulation, not control, just the ability to recognize the pattern before it traps you. The moment you understand that people cling to the familiar, worship the past, fear the new, and project their insecurities onto whoever stands closest, you stop drowning in their expectations. You stop mistaking their discomfort for your failure. You stop confusing their nostalgia with your inadequacy. You finally step out of the shadow and into your own story. And that's the quiet truth Machiavelli never had to spell out. Once you're aware, you move differently. You choose differently. You stop chasing ghosts and start building something that's actually yours. You stop inheriting narratives and start writing them. You stop being shaped by the game and start seeing the board for what it is. And once you're awake like that, the world can't put you back to sleep. Take care.